cars, fellas fitted, girls nothing on. You looking good, mama, why? What's up, homie?
Okay, what happened to him?
He had some kind of, he went to the hospital originally for like some type of cyst.
Hey, good evening, Greg. His mom told me she's praying for her son, but family members and his...
A name that once shook America. Multi-platinum albums. Radio played him non-stop. Clubs exploded every time that rap voice came on. He had a life others could only dream of. But after millions of records sold, what did Mystikal have left? The truth may make you pause. An abandoned house in Louisiana. A fortune once valued in the millions of dollars. It sounds big, but next to rappers of the same era, that number feels small. It does not match. It does not reflect the peak Mystikal once reached. And it certainly does not reflect what he created for American hip-hop culture. So what is the real question? What did this industry take from Mystikal freedom time? Or the wealth he should have had 10 times over? Don't look away. In this video, we step into Mystikal's abandoned house, turn his life upside down, and expose the bitter truth hidden behind the glow that once shook America. Are you ready? Mystikal's real name is Michael Lawrence Tyler, born on September 22, 1970, in the 12th Ward of New Orleans, Louisiana. That was not a place where people grew up feeling safe. It was a place where kids had to learn to listen to their surroundings before daring to dream. Some children grow up in homes filled with laughter, full dinners, and adults who stand in front to shield them from whatever comes next. Mystikal did not. He was born and raised in New Orleans, a city always echoing with music, but also constantly filled with the noise of poverty, violence, and instability. There, music was not just entertainment, it was how people calmed themselves just enough to make it through another day. When Mystikal was very young, his father died. No warning, no time to prepare. One day, the backbone of the family was simply gone. The house changed instantly. For many children, losing a father is a sad memory. For Mystikal, it was the moment childhood was forced to end earlier than normal. The home stopped being a place of shelter and became a place where he had to learn to stand on his own before he was ready. His mother carried everything that remained, raising her children while trying to keep the family from sliding off course. She leaned on strict Baptist faith as a framework to hold things together. Discipline was present in everyday life, but discipline does not equal warmth. Sometimes it only makes the silence last longer. Years later, when Mystikal had stages, money, and fame, another tragedy struck. His sister passed away. That death was not a sudden shock. It felt more like an old wound being cut open again. It hit the exact spot that had been weak for a long time. Losses that seemed buried came back quietly, but relentlessly. Looking back at Mystikal's childhood, it is hard to find a real sense of safety. Not because he lacked a roof over his head, but because that home was never a place to let go. It taught him how to endure, not how to rest. It taught him how to stand straight, not how to lean on someone. So when people later talk about the abandoned house in Louisiana, maybe that was not random at all. It feels like a logical ending to a journey that began very early. A childhood that was never settled eventually left behind a house with walls and a roof, but missing the most important thing, a sense of safety. The Louisiana mansion, what it holds, breaking down the value of $1 million property. When money starts pouring in, people often believe everything will finally be calm. Mystikal believed that too. At his peak, he was not just a famous rapper. He was a real money-making machine. Albums sold millions of copies. Projects hit #1 on Billboard shows were fully booked and cash flowed in steadily. This was the phase when every time he stepped on stage, the brand value of the name Mystikal climbed another level. For many, this is when they build castles, raise monuments, and hang power on the front of their lives. Mystikal chose a different path. He bought a house in Prairieville, Louisiana, a quiet suburb near Baton Rouge. Not the center of spotlights, not a place for display. Prairieville is where people move when they are tired of noise, when they want a slower, more private, more grounded rhythm of life. Just choosing that location already showed that Mystikal was not using money to show off, but to find a place to stop. The house had the feel of a high-end American suburban mansion, spacious without being flashy. The kind of home that does not overwhelm you with glamour, but convinces you with a sense of solidity. Typically 1 or 2 stories built on a large lot set back far enough from the street to create distance. An open front yard, a long driveway, a garage with room for multiple cars not to display but to use. Inside an open layout, true to the spirit of late 1990s and early 2000s American homes. A large living room, high ceilings, natural light pouring in through wide windows. The main living space connected to the dining area and kitchen, creating a seamless flow with no sharp divisions. This kind of design is meant for family life, for long-term living, not for quick parties. Homes like this usually have 3 to 4 bedrooms, with a spacious primary bedroom set apart, including a private bathroom and dressing area. The other rooms are suitable for family relatives or guests staying over. Every space aims for comfort and privacy. There are no unnecessary details meant to grab attention, but everything is built large enough to make the people inside feel like they have arrived. Out back is a yard. Not necessarily with a luxury pool or elaborate landscaping, but wide enough to breathe. Maybe a patio, maybe a lawn, a place where at night you can stand hear insects and pull yourself away from the noise that followed you through youth. This is not a backyard to show off to neighbors. This is a backyard to close the door and disappear. What matters is that with the money Mystikal earned, he could have owned far more extravagant things. But the Prairieville house was not built as a monument of power. It was more like an everyday fortress, a shelter built with money aimed at peace rather than other people's eyes. Seen this way, Mystikal's wealth is not just in numbers, it is in choice. The choice not to chase Hollywood symbols. The choice to put down roots far enough away to escape temptation, but close enough not to lose himself. For many, this signals maturity. For Mystikal, it was a very real attempt to fix what had been missing since the beginning of his life. But money can build a house. It cannot always build a sense of safety. That mansion had enough room, space, and comfort to protect a family, but it could not protect its owner from inner conflict. The peace Mystikal was searching for never truly arrived. It stayed outside the door, while inside everything kept colliding. So when people look at the Louisiana house and call it a massive asset, what makes them think is not how much it was worth. It is this paradox. A man who once had enough money to buy calm but never truly lived inside it. And that is why that house, no matter how full it once was, still led to a feeling of being left behind. The crime, the case, and the final breaking point. There are mistakes that once made leave no room to be repaired by time or apology. For Mystikal, the year 2022 was that breaking point. In July 2022, police in Ascension Parish, Louisiana, received a complaint from a woman. According to her initial statement, she claimed she had been assaulted at a house in Prairieville. The location mentioned was not unfamiliar. It was the very house where Mystikal lived. A place once seen as quiet refuge away from stage lights now became the center of a criminal investigation. After receiving the complaint, police carried out preliminary investigative steps. They collected statements, cross-checked information, and identified Mystikal as a suspect in the case. There was no immediate media frenzy at first. Everything followed legal procedure. But the moment the name Mystikal appeared in official records, the case took on a different weight. Police later executed an arrest warrant. Mystikal was arrested at the Prairieville house itself. That moment marked a complete reversal of a space built as a refuge. The home was no longer a symbol of stability, but a site tied to criminal records, paperwork, handcuffs, and police vehicles. According to prosecutorial records cited by American media, Mystikal was charged with multiple serious offenses. The most severe was first-degree rape, an especially serious charge under Louisiana law. In addition, there were charges related to domestic abuse involving strangulation, false imprisonment, simple robbery, and property damage. This was not a single accusation, but a stack of charges that made the case exceptionally serious. It is important to emphasize that all of the above are allegations. They are not final court conclusions. In court appearances, Mystikal has pleaded not guilty. The legal process is still ongoing and no final verdict has been issued. However, the severity of the charges led to a critical decision. Mystikal was denied bond while awaiting trial. Several factors were considered in this decision. First was the nature of the charges. Under Louisiana law, if convicted of first-degree rape, the punishment can be extremely severe, including life imprisonment. This type of charge requires the court to carefully weigh the risks of allowing release before trial. Second was prior legal history. Mystikal did not enter the courtroom with a clean record. He previously pleaded guilty and served around 6 years in prison in the early 2000s for another case. In the years that followed, he also faced multiple prosecutions, even though some were later dismissed. All of these factors were weighed when the court considered bond. Third was community safety. This is always a top priority in serious cases. When allegations involve violence and sexual assault, the potential risk to the public if a defendant is released cannot be ignored. As a result, Mystikal remained in custody without bond throughout the pre-trial period. That period has not been short. The case has been postponed multiple times. As of now, there is still no final verdict, and the trial is expected to take place in the year 2026. During this detention, Mystikal's life has largely been frozen. He cannot perform, cannot appear publicly, and cannot control his personal image. A once active music career has fallen into prolonged silence. Assets still exist on paper, but their real value hangs in limbo alongside the legal fate of their owner. Once again, the Prairieville house reappears in Mystikal's story, but this time, it is no longer a symbol of stability or success. It becomes the center of tragedy, not a stage, not applause, but the place that marks the moment a life turned in another direction, where nothing can return to the way it was. And that is the final breaking point, not because the lights went out, but because the door to freedom closed at least until the court delivers its final answer. Life behind bars. Silence is the longest sentence. And for Mystikal, that sentence began the moment the cell door shut. In prison, there is no microphone, no stage, no lights, no cheers, no moments that let you forget reality. What remains is time stretching day by day, impossible to fast forward, impossible to cut, impossible to remix into something easier to bear. For someone who once lived through sound, that silence is not just a change of setting, it is the stripping away of identity. Mystikal has been held without bond, and the wait for trial has stretched longer than many expected. There is no clear schedule to hold on to, no fixed date to count down to. Only hearings that get postponed, brief court appearances, then a return to the cell. Each time, hope does not disappear, but it is never nourished either. It just hangs there exhausted. On the outside, Mystikal controlled his image through music. Whether people liked it or not, he still had a voice. In prison, that right is gone. His image is shaped from the outside through headlines, comments, speculation. He cannot edit. It cannot respond. Cannot do the one thing he was best at: speak in his own rhythm. Performance income has completely stopped. No shows, no tours, no new contracts. Mystikal's music still exists out there on the radio, on digital platforms, in listeners' memories. But the paradox is this: the person who created it cannot touch it. He cannot step on stage to feel the crowd's reaction. He cannot use music to reset himself. He cannot turn energy into an exit. In the music industry, disappearance does not require an announcement. It only requires silence long enough. A new generation shows up. The current keeps moving. Other names fill the gap. For Mystikal, every day in prison pushes him further from the center of the hip-hop story. Not because he is forgotten overnight, but because this industry does not wait for anyone to stand still. The cost of disappearing is not just money or fame. It is the feeling of being cut off from your own era. In prison, Mystikal is no longer part of the cultural conversations happening outside. He cannot hear the new heartbeat of the music industry firsthand. Everything reaches him slower, more distorted, filtered through other people. A prison does not need to be loud to be crushing. It only needs to be steady. Steady schedules, steady repetition, steady reminders that the old life has been paused indefinitely. For an artist used to living at high speed, that steadiness wears away in its own way. Music still lives, but it is no longer a tool of salvation. It becomes something out of reach. And that may be the harshest part. Not the loss of physical freedom, but the loss of the ability to use the thing you do best to face yourself. As Mystikal sits behind bars, the outside world keeps playing music. But for him, that sound no longer hits the same. It is there very close but separated by a silence that no beat can break. Where the family stands when everything falls apart. When the lights go out, you find out who stays. And in Mystikal's story, the ones who stayed were not colleagues, not the music industry, and not the crowds that once shouted his name. It was family. Throughout the legal process between dry court updates and heavy headlines, Mystikal's family appeared in a very different way. No noise, no statements, no press conferences. They did not step forward to tell their story. They simply showed up quietly in courthouse hallways. Present, then gone. Nothing more. The image mentioned most often was not Mystikal, but his mother, an elderly woman appearing in reports with one defining action: praying. No speeches, no calls for justice, no attempts to polish her son's image. Just a silent posture, hands clasped, eyes lowered. This was not the image of a media campaign. It was the image of a mother who no longer controlled anything except her faith. Mystikal's family chose silence. And in an era where silence is often mistaken for avoidance, that choice carries a different meaning. They did not step out to justify anything. They did not try to steer public opinion. They did not attempt to reclaim lost fame. Perhaps because they understood one thing clearly: fame can disappear in an instant, but a person cannot be abandoned in the same way. In moments like this, family is no longer a romantic idea. It becomes a load-bearing structure, something that keeps a person from collapsing completely, even when nothing can be saved. Mystikal's family has no power to change the legal process. They have no tools to shift public opinion. The only thing they have is steady presence day after day. No words were offered to defend him before the public. No statements to calm public outrage. And that in itself says a great deal. The family did not stand there to argue right or wrong. They stood there to keep Mystikal from being stripped entirely of his humanity during a process where everything else was being redefined. There is a clear paradox here. When Mystikal was at his peak, when his music played everywhere, family barely appeared in the public narrative. But when he fell, when the stage lights went dark, family became the only thing that remained consistently present. Not to be seen, but to not leave. In court appearances, the hallway is not where victory or defeat is decided. It is where waiting happens. Mystikal's family stood there not knowing what tomorrow would bring, not knowing how it would end. They had no answers, only time and patience. In that context, prayer is not just a religious act. It is the only way to keep from breaking under things beyond control. The family also understands that some losses cannot be saved. Reputation may be shattered. A career may be frozen. But the person is still there, even imprisoned, even criticized, even judged. Holding on to that person in silence may be the final goal. No one in Mystikal's family stepped forward to say he was innocent, but no one turned away either. That choice is not easy. It places them under scrutiny from both sides. But it is the choice of people not seeking victory in the public eye, only trying not to lose more after so much has already been lost. Some battles are not meant to be won. They are only meant to keep a connection alive while everything else fractures. Mystikal's family did not enter this fight with ambitions of reversing the outcome. They entered with one simple hope: not to let everything end in isolation. And in a world of courtrooms, allegations, and thick case files, that quiet presence carries a different kind of weight. It does not change verdicts, but it changes context. It reminds us that behind every case is a network of people who did not choose this role, but must live with it. When the stage lights are gone, when the music no longer plays the same way, family cannot pull Mystikal out from behind bars. But they can stand close enough that he does not disappear completely into silence. And sometimes in stories of collapse, that is all that remains to hold on to. The musical journey, a child to be proud of. Before the name Mystikal became tied to courtrooms, it was tied to something very different: music and energy. Mystikal did not enter hip-hop with a glamorous image. He came in with a raspy, rapid-fire delivery, as if every word had to fight its way out just to exist. In the late 1990s, when Southern hip-hop was still searching for its place on the national map, Mystikal hit like a hard knock on the table, forcing people to turn around and look. His debut album was not an instant explosion, but it laid the foundation for a style that was hard to blend with anything else. Mystikal rapped, fast-rapped, tight-rapped, like he was racing his own breath. It was not technique meant to show off. It was how he transmitted energy. Listening to Mystikal. You did not need to catch every word, but you always felt the urgency in his voice. The real turning point came when Mystikal entered his phase of working with major labels and was placed at the center of the mainstream current. From there, his music no longer lived only in southern communities, but spread across the United States. Mystikal's records began appearing constantly on the radio, in clubs, in cars, at parties, where everyone needed something strong enough to push the atmosphere higher. The song Shake Ya Ass is the clearest example of that era. It was not complex, not philosophical, but explosive. Heavy rhythm and unforgettable hook, a signature vocal that took only seconds to recognize. Shake Ya Ass quickly became a pop culture phenomenon. It was everywhere, not just on charts, but in everyday life. That was the moment Mystikal was not just a rapper, but someone creating the sound of an entire summer. He did not stop there. Mystikal continued to leave his mark with Danger. Been so long a track that showed he could do more than create hype. He could tell stories through rhythm. The song carried a darker, more personal tone while still holding mainstream appeal. At that time, it was not easy for a Southern rapper to balance street energy with national radio reach. Mystikal did it. His commercial achievements during this period were undeniable. Albums sold millions of copies. Some projects climbed to #1 on the Billboard charts. These numbers were not the result of gimmicks, but of music that met exactly what audiences wanted at the time. People needed something strong, raw, real, and direct. Mystikal delivered that. What set Mystikal apart from many rappers of his era was his stage energy. He was not the type to stand still and rap through verses. Mystikal performed as if every song was a release of energy. His voice stayed tense, his body constantly moving, always hovering on the edge between control and explosion. Audiences did not just listen, they were pulled in. At his peak, Mystikal became a familiar name at award shows, major events, and tours. He represented a branch of Southern hip-hop that did not need to soften itself to be accepted. He kept his raw edge and still stepped into the mainstream center. That was something not everyone could do. Mystikal's music at that time did not need much explanation. It did not try to become a social manifesto. It existed as a source of energy, something that helped listeners release pressure, let go, forget reality for a few minutes. And sometimes, that is the most important role music can play. Looking back, Mystikal's musical journey is the journey of someone who truly reached the top. Not the top in a flashy sense, but the top of presence. There was a period when turning on the radio meant hearing his voice. Walking into a club meant being unable to avoid his rhythm. That was real success, with no need for embellishment. What matters is that Mystikal achieved those heights by being himself, not by building an overly polished image. He did not construct a glamorous persona. He did not try to become a fashion icon or media mogul. He just rapped, and he rapped with everything he had. Because of that, when looking back at the time before his legal downfall, it is impossible to deny that Mystikal once had a career worth being proud of. Not just because of sales or chart positions, but because he was genuinely part of American musical life. A voice that once heard everyone immediately knew who it was. And perhaps that is what makes the later story feel heavier. When someone who once had all of that falls into silence, the void left behind is not just the absence of an artist. It is the absence of an entire era his music once represented. Mystikal was there once, very high, and no one can deny that. The abandoned house and the unanswered question, can success save someone from themselves? That is the question left hanging after everything that happened to Mystikal. He once had what so many people dream of, money from albums that sold millions of copies, fame large enough for his voice to echo across American radio. Music that once moved crowds made entire spaces erupt within the first few beats. And then, there was the house in Louisiana, chosen as a stopping point, a place to escape the noise to live a calmer life. At some point, everything seemed to fall into place. Money was no longer an issue. His name was established. No need to chase the spotlight every night. Just close the doorstep into his own house and leave the world outside. For many, that would be a perfect ending.
We'll break down
For
what
Mystikal,
really went.
it was only a short pause before a much longer silence. Now what remains is not a stage and not cheering crowds. What remains is silence and time. Time inside a cell moving slowly without rhythm to hold on to. Time where everything once familiar is pushed out of reach. Music still exists, but it is no longer something he can use to talk to himself. The house in Louisiana still stands. It has not collapsed. It has not been abandoned in a physical sense. The walls are still there. The roof remains intact. The garage still has space for the cars that once came and went, but the warmth is gone. No footsteps, no daily life, no sense that this is a place to return to. A house can be solid, but without people, it becomes an empty frame. What is worth thinking about is that this house was not abandoned because of poverty. It was left behind by a chain of choices and events made by someone who once stood very high. It became a symbol of a familiar paradox. Success can take you very far, but it does not guarantee it will keep you safe. Mystikal is not the first to fall into that paradox. But his story is hard to ignore because the distance between the peak and the present is so stark. From a voice that represented an entire era, he became a name tied to legal records and extended pre-trial hearings, not because the music disappeared, but because life took a different turn. At this ending, there is no verdict of right or wrong, no final judgment to close the book. There is only a reality that exists. Mystikal once had everything society usually associates with success. But those things were not enough to stop a person from facing himself when every layer of protection fell away. The abandoned house in Louisiana does not need to be seen as dramatic tragedy. It is simply a quiet period, a place standing still while the life of the person who once owned it was pulled in another direction. And in that silence, the question still remains: is the blinding light of fame worth trading for a life locked inside memory? Or are there things that no matter how successful one becomes can never replace the inner peace? People are always searching.
That's the reality of the game. Fame always comes with a price. If you vibe with the content and want the real uncut stories, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to the Black Vault. We encourage viewers to approach the content with an open mind, critical thinking, and to always cross-reference with multiple sources in order to form their own perspective.